So we're talking today about managing the balance between organizational and individual expectations, because today new talent and existing talent, people in your business are all expecting a much more individual sort of offer. They expect more flexibility, more autonomy, etc. So to start with, I wanted to ask, are you finding that candidates are expecting a more personalized experience today? And why do you think that is? So perhaps, Peter, we can start with you on that one.
Yeah, I think the answer is 100% they are. And I think that's a combination of the talent market being particularly challenging in certain sectors, technology being probably the key amongst those. And I think what that's led to is CHROs and talent acquisition leaders recognizing that they need to do things differently. They cannot just carry on hiring in the same way through the same talent pools and offering the same packages and benefits that they always have done. For example, we were with the group of CHROs in London, and during our boardroom session that we ran for those CHROs, there was an awful lot of conversation around the sheep dip approach to talent does not work anymore. So it is about personalization. It is also about looking at new areas for talent. One of the most compelling examples was one of our clients looking at remote working opportunities in India. So again, trying to attract the female talent who've gone out of the market in India and allowing them access to work where without remote working wouldn't have been possible.
So, Ali, you're in the States. So is the picture the same there?
I, you know, Definitely candidates are expecting a more personalized approach. I think they have more personalized questions and concerns. Whereas before, I think the hiring process was much more focused on just the role and the professional aspects. Now candidates are feeling empowered to ask for what they need. Are there remote days? Is there a family first policy? Is it a close knit team? If they're working remotely, who's their leader going to be? I think that plays in quite heavily. So candidates know that they are in the driving seat because of the shortage that we're having and everybody moving around, all the movement we've seen in the professional space. So candidates are not afraid. They're very emboldened, which is not a bad thing, to come out and say what they're looking for to make sure that they get their best career match. So you have to personalize the process more in order to secure those candidates.
So looking at this from an organizational perspective, the process here, how they can actually do this personalization. Ali, can I sort of come to you and ask, how would you look at personalizing at this recruitment stage, at the stage of hiring?
Well, I think there are three areas that are really affected by the recruitment stage. And you've got the candidate acquisition stage initially, where you are making initial contact, getting to know that candidate, they're getting to know your business, and that's sort of that alignment test that's happening there. And then once that happens, once the candidate has spoken to someone at their prospective employer, it's very important to have a high touch relationship with that candidate. And that means in this market, we need to treat everyone with dignity and respect. Candidates are hard to find. Um, if they take time to interview, it's important to treat that with respect so that if you want to come back to them later, 2 years later, they're going to take your call. They're not going to feel that they were ghosted, to use a common term. And I think in the past, pre-COVID, that happened a lot where candidates would come in, do an interview, second round, third round, and then they'd be waiting for their response. And no one would ever tell them that another choice had been made, give them feedback. So, or there would be these long gaps of time between when they had their interviews and when they received news about were they moving forward to the next step. The thing that's changed is one that used to be acceptable and it used to work for the employers still. And that no longer works for the employers and it's no longer acceptable by the candidates. So you have to be touching these candidates and circling back with them on a weekly basis, even if it's something to say, Joe Schmo, who we'd like you to interview with, is on vacation until the 13th. So we will call you on the 14th and schedule the next step in the process. Candidates need to hear that they're still a priority, that they're still being thought about, that they haven't been pushed to the back burner. Because if there's one thing that's true, if you're not talking to your candidates, your competitors are. and they might be doing it better. If you haven't thought this through, they're very well doing it better than you. So you have to have that high touch relationship to show your interest. Because in this market, and even before, candidates interpret a lack of response or a delay as a lack of interest, even if it's not. That is the first thing that they jump to. So even if the lack of response is due to a lack of process coordination or someone being on vacation, the candidate doesn't know that unless they are specifically informed.
There's a balance here that employers need to strike between high touch and speed. So again, if you talk to some clients, particularly in the technology sector, they've moved from 3 or 4 interview stages to all of the interviews being performed on a single day and a decision within 24 hours of the interviews. So there's a balance there between how much can you engage with a candidate based on a relatively short time frame from initial interest to hire. One example I give is we have a major technology client who has very different styles of operation for their talent acquisition in 2 different regions of their organization. And one of those regions has always utilized a very, very high touch and very candidate centric approach. And the other, because they've generally had much higher volumes, have not, and they haven't needed to. What's starting to happen is the acquisition rates or the rates of dropout for the region that haven't historically had a very high touch relationship with candidate started to drop and decline quite significantly. Whereas the region that have always taken a high touch approach maintain their level of flow through the process, albeit with some tweaks to react more quickly to candidates. One of the other things that I saw last week, 2 weeks ago, with the CHRO community we talked to in London, is one of the organizations there that's taken a very, very conscious decision to change the way they approach and deal with candidates. So instead of treating people who are applying to them as candidates, they flipped the entire internal process, and they're now treating individuals who are applying for work in the same way that they treat potential customers. So actually, their internal dialogue and lexicon has all changed to treat candidates as potential customers, which is really interesting, and that just shows how in demand talent is in certain sectors.
Well, let's pick up on that, the challenge, the fact that it is very challenging. And Ali, from what we're talking about here, it sounds like a no-brainer that organizations should be taking a more individualized and more personalized approach. But why are some not doing this? What are the big barriers that they have to overcome?
I think there is still a strong sense in many companies, and large or small, I don't think the size is particularly important here, that they have a process, a somewhat rigid process that candidates have to go through. And those processes have control points that are in the past have been extremely important, these control points. And the company's attitude in the past could be, it was almost like, well, we have something you want, which is a position of interest for you in your career. And these are the things you have to go through our steps in order to find out if we will select you for that role. And I think with more employers thinking flexibly and in a more customized way about how are they going to appeal to top talent, engage top talent through the hiring process. For instance, someone with a high touch recruitment plan, especially, is going to be much more advantaged than someone who says, we have this rigid process. We've always done it this way. This is what works for us, or we can't see how to change it. And if the candidates don't want to go through our process, then they're not the candidates for us. And I think that was much more pre-pandemic way of thinking, and maybe also during the recession that we had, 2007, 2008. And so the problem with that is that if the process doesn't take into account the individual applicants, and support the business needs. If it's not in line with the business needs, to hire someone quickly or to talk to the right people or to make, I think today you have to be much more flexible to say, well, it may not be our process to have Jane Doe talk to Susie Q about these important goals for the next 3 to 6 to 9 months on the team. That may not be something that the company did before, but they need to do it now so that, Jane Doe is interested to work with Susie Q on her team and gets really excited to join. So you have to think outside the box a bit. And you can't let your process get in the way of the goal of bringing the right people on board. Because if you bring the right people on board, they will continue as they move up and become leaders to bring the right people on board to that organization. So it's a ripple effect over time.
Backtracking a little bit to the flexible working question, I think that genie is out of the bottle. That's generally accepted. The bit that will be interesting is to see whether that balance changes if we do see any softening in terms of the economy based on the high rates of inflation that we're seeing really more around the world. At the moment, talent is very much in the ascendant, and those that are actively seeking jobs know it because it's very obvious to see. So, the higher levels of personalization, the higher levels of flexible working, which talent is able to demand, is absolutely where the market is now. When we look at our clients across the globe, those that offer the most flexible working options are the most attractive employers at the moment. But, salary is important, and there's a portion of talent who really are interested in money. And again, if you think about the career life cycle, that's often people who are early or mid-range in their career who are still looking for the college funds for their kids, or who are still looking for the next car and the next house. What we're finding a lot more is that particularly those people that are mid to senior in their career are much more interested in having much, much higher degree of flexibility around how or where they work.
Is this a permanent shift, Peter? Or do you think this is just a result of the exceptional circumstances that we've had with the pandemic and with the increasing digitalization?
I think we are in exceptional times. I think that is without a shadow of a doubt. So, a combination of factors coming out of a pandemic, talent shortages, high levels of digitization, war in Ukraine, political unrest all over the place. I think, it's hard to see that set of circumstances coming together again. I think what has changed over the last 12 months is that talent has become hugely emboldened about about their position, and one would argue kind of rightly so. I think this hybrid working, flexible working is a genie that's out of the bottle, and many people won't accept going back to it, going back to a sort of normal 5-day week in the office model with standardized benefits, unless there are no other options. And I think there are now a huge number of organizations that have recognized that actually it does work perfectly well when people are remote, and individualized packages are actually a reasonable thing to do. Armstrong Craven, we've always had a remote first policy. So in the nicest possible way, when the pandemic happened, our message was take your laptops home and don't come in tomorrow. Now there's an awful lot of stuff that went on behind that. Operationally, we just carried on. Many organizations have gone through an enormous amount of pain to go from that to where they are today. Call centers probably right up there. And I know a lot of people still have to work from a physical office, but that genie is never going back in the bottom unless a whole sector stops offering that. And I think if you are a disruptor in a sector, you're going to carry on offering that because it differentiates you. You can hire people that you might not otherwise have been able to get hold of. And we've seen that right across organizations, and that kind of legacy of how people were treated during the pandemic also sticks around. So actually some organizations are doing really well because they treated people well during the pandemic. Some organizations are really struggling because they didn't treat people particularly fairly during the pandemic. It's also no surprise to me that the loudest voices, when you spend any time in the US, the loudest voices saying that remote working is an anathema and it will cease, are exactly those same people who are demanding their teams come back into office 5 days a week. So Jamie Dimon, JP Morgan, Elon Musk, those are the only voices saying it's going to end. And that's because they want it to. I don't think anybody else is saying this is a fad, this will come back. I just don't think it will.
And so, Ali, looking at all of this, do you think we need a different type of leader to be able to deal with this move to personalization, and also picking up on the remote work that Peter's mentioned? What should we be looking for in our sort of talent acquisition and our HR leaders going forward?
Well, I think to Peter's point, the toothpaste is out of the tube, right? So we have to start thinking about this in terms of instead of waiting for the new normal, it's the genie's out of the bottle, the toothpaste is out of the tube. Now you have to switch gears, which can be difficult. You have to switch gears to now factor in those things. So I would say that as remote work has taken root and I think been well received by many, employers are looking to hire leaders who can manage remote teams. That's a specific criteria that they need now, and inspire excellence instead of having someone who's in the office, boots on the ground, with a more demandatory or requirement based, we need to do this the best. And I think the new leaders who work with remote teams have to connect and engage and build their teams, but also have those remote employees want to contribute as much as possible with that inspirational leadership style. And that's becoming more important. And as they are invested and included in the hiring process for their teams, it helps the process feel more customized for the candidates because they're talking to their future boss. And if that person is more inspirational and is a better connector, that's going to benefit the hiring process as they're one, vetting candidates, but two, getting candidates excited about the prospect of joining that specific team with that specific leader. And we all know that a huge reason that people take jobs is because they want to work with the person they're going to report to. They want to be mentored. They want to learn what that person has to share. They admire that person's approach and experience. So having the key leaders is really important to personalizing, I think, the job search process for these candidates. They need to engage with the right kind of leaders on the teams that they want to join. So I think that shift is really important. Leadership is not just leading on a daily basis, but they're building the teams and building the benches underneath them. And that's incredibly important.
So Peter, how can Armstrong Craven help talent and HR professionals to manage this balance between the organizational and the individual's expectations today?
So there's a couple of things that happened that led clients to come and talk to us in a lot more detail about some of the issues. I think the first one is organizations are looking for talent in lots of different places now. So previously, talent acquisition teams would really understand and be very clear about where they're looking for talent, what the parameters are. From a geographical point of view, if nothing else, there is a skills issue as well, where organizations skills because of skill shortages. But if we just take the geographic issue, TA teams now don't quite know where to look because most organizations will have a remote first policy, particularly within scarce roles, particularly within technology. So a lot of clients come to us and say, right, actually, we need to understand what the talent landscape looks like for this particular skill set, but across a much wider geography ever had to look before. So that talent identification, what we call talent mapping, is now becoming increasingly important for talent acquisition teams. And we will either pass that data to the TA team and they can deal with it themselves, or often what we're being asked to do is then do the first level of engagement and then pass them individuals who are interested in the conversation. So, and that's just purely helping TA teams deal with A, volume, and B, candidate scarcity. Can't rely anymore on active candidates to fill roles because there simply aren't enough of them. And I think the other point that happened again is, and it's related more to the scarcity point, is organizations want to understand the motivations and behaviors of talent. And a lot of the insights work we do will understand and analyze talent cohorts and talent pools for clients. But what they also want to know is, and how on earth do I get those people to come and work for us? What do they think of us? What are their career aspirations? So we are picking up the phone and talking to talent and then creating useful reports, usable reports that clients can say, okay, I understand what the aggregate talent pool actually thinks about my organization, their work-life balance, what are their motivations, and then they can align their talent acquisition strategy to give them the best chance of success.